Welcome students, we are in lecture 8. We will talk about the agents of transformation, episode 2, and we will explain the concept of change agents in this particular episode. I hope you will learn about what change agents are, how transformation can go or spread faster, and how the role of agency in social change in general is. We have the following, as you can see on the slide, the following topics: the role of agency within processes of innovation and transformation. We will deal with the concept of change agents, and we will in particular relate to the change agents for a low-carbon transformation. What are agents of transformation? And I think this particular question is most important for the answer how innovations can spread in general in our modern societies and how they can spread faster. You are all familiar with this, how the cognitive thread goes. We mostly say from awareness, we know things, to action, we act. But maybe when we can put the thing in another way, we can talk how we come from action to awareness. As you all know, there is a consensus in most of our societies that something must be done to prevent dangerous climate change, or the loss of biodiversity, or the collapse of the global financial markets. And this consensus can be reached very quickly, both at world climate or financial conferences and during your dinner table conversations. We have a fairly good idea of what should be done, and at least some of us would also be prepared to give up our habitual lifestyles. We do have efficient technologies available to us, and we have issued global declarations on preventing dangerous climate change and conserving biological diversity in international framework agreements. And we have passed at supranational, national and regional level all these agreements. And still, we will fail if this is as far as it goes. The difficulties lie in turning awareness into action, as past dependencies, barriers to innovation and institutional routines stand in the way of the insights already gained and paralyze the impulse to act. At first glance, the transformation into a low-carbon society is one of those Herculean tasks which seem unsolvable at the outset. Targets which are too ambitious, too few actors to achieve them in too short a time scale. Perceptions such as these and problematic global framework conditions frequently lead to resignation and apathy. So the crux of the matter is defining concrete targets and interim targets for solving these global problems, to implement the realization of these targets sensibly and to share the workload fairly, and to set priorities and draw up realistic timetables. The tight window for the avoidance of dangerous climate change must be met with prioritization and acceleration. To succeed, the currently existing mental willingness must be stimulated, thematically charged, and turned into action through the establishment of a network of actors by a proactive state. A historical review of great upheavals shows that time and again there have been historical situations in which individuals or small groups have rebelled against what Georg Büchner, the German writer, called the terrible fatalism of history, to achieve that which seemed almost impossible, thus becoming change agents. The history of civil enlightenment and revolutions is as much proof of this as the colonies' fight for independence, symbolized by the peaceful resistance practiced by Mahatma Gandhi or Nelson Mandela, and the Velvet Revolution in the Eastern European countries and the GDR, brought about by people like Lech Walesa and Bärbel Bohley, not forgetting Willy Brandt and Mikhail Gorbachev, and not to forget the masses on the street. The above-mentioned diffuse we must therefore be concretized and shaped into local and supralocal task forces with the ability to communicate recommendations for action efficiently and to secure them in effective identity structures, what means we feelings or collective identity. What is lacking both at a global and a national level is an awareness of the self-efficacy and the realization of the power that actors such as these have, people who are already, whether consciously or unconsciously, participators in the transformation. Governmental and non-governmental organizations must not only extend their scope for action, they must above all create structures and networks that allow the swift and permanent mobilization of actors who are committed to transformative objectives. I'm saying here that we are really talking about a kind of revolution. The structural preconditions for the conversion of such dispositions into action were already elaborated on the basis of historical examples. The following, what I'm saying here, deals with how and why which actors a process such as this, difficult to predict and difficult to plan, can be initiated, shaped and supported. In our view, turning awareness into requisite action cannot succeed through knowledge transfer alone, but also includes participative dimensions and feedback. Knowledge is nothing without those who know, and knowledge is disseminated only through actors. A transformation process is bound to fail if the experts only rely on the self-evidence of the reasonableness of their suggestions, arrived at after much theoretical debate, and then hope to motivate laymen with information campaigns and incentive systems to accept the relevant measures after the event. As far as climate protection and adaptation and even ultimately the creation of acceptance are concerned, it is probably that according to participation and innovation, research findings, policies and social movements that rely on early consultation or deliberation of those concerned and their active participation to legitimize political administrative measures would be more successful than any attempts by political administrative institutions alone. Technological innovations and political legal steering must find a mobilized citizenship to fully develop their problem-solving potential. This applies in normal times, but even more so in escalating crisis situations and in view of the time pressure due to the crisis of the Earth system. This is the challenge for 21st century democratic policies. Let me talk a bit about the concept of change agents. How can we define it? What kind of roles are included? And can we come to a typology? Transition research results suggest that individual actors can play a far larger role in the transformation of social systems than one that has been accorded to them for quite some time, during which academic interest has usually focused on boundaries for action and the effects of systemic emergence. Thus, the analysis of historical examples shows that social change is characterized not only by the emergence of new technologies and new major economic industries, but above all, also by changes in mentalities and institutions driven by aspiring social classes. Identifiable actor constellations with sufficient power, resources and creativity prepared to welcome innovations and reforms in order to overcome the established obstructive powers emerge as the drivers of change. The speed of a transformation, or whether it can succeed at all, depends largely on the involved actors availing themselves of the existing opportunity structures. However, examining contemporary and historical transition or transformation processes also clearly shows that actors can not only profit from the window of opportunity that open, but that frequently they are also actively involved in the opening. Strategic groups and alliances function as role models and trendsetters during this process in this way. They provide isolated innovation impulses with a cultural hegemony. We know from diffusion and transition research that change agents, and let us define them as strategic actors who are sometimes unconscious pioneers of social change, spreading an awareness of the chances it offers, that they play a key role when new technologies and ideas are introduced. The role of these change agents in the initiation and shaping of change processes has been examined in various disciplines dealing with diffusion and innovation processes, including some business studies, sociology, and psychology. The concept this approach is based on is summarized by a German scholar as follows, I quote, "Change agents have a convincing idea for change and an initial concept for its realization. They network and gain important fellow campaigners, in this way managing to win the critical mass for change. Subsequently, they gradually develop the idea further together. The changing of routines and framework conditions, the establishment of new institutions and a paradigm shift conclude the process." End of quote. And you will find this represented on the slide. Change agents support certain changes, actively driving them ahead. Initially, change agents are, for the most part, single individuals and small groups. They propagate innovations by questioning business as usual policies and creating alternative practices, thereby challenging the established worldviews and paths, attitudinal and behavioral patterns, as well as providing others who think as they do, followers, early adopters, with a constant motivation for self-sustaining change. This process typically includes long-term orientation and the overcoming of loss and risk aversions. Change agents, therefore, not only affect changes selectively within their own sphere of experience, but also nudge comparably widespread transformation processes at local level and from below. They find emulators and animate others to change their behavioral practices. Schematically, a blockade situation that is governed by business as usual policies can therefore be countered with an innovation scenario. Change agents would replace veto players at the individual interest level, acting as previously elaborated. At the level of attitudes and dispositions, a pioneering spirit would be prevalent rather than one of loss aversion. At a higher symbolic or framing level, the tone would be set by a culture of innovation rather than cultural barriers. You can find this on the slide. Change agents are not just individuals. They are also organizations and groups who could support and transport the transformation outlined in our ideas. Based on precedents and synthesis, the focus will particularly be on change agents who accelerate conversion processes, substantiating and shaping ongoing socio-technological changes, legislative processes, and market development as consumers, entrepreneurs, investors, and of course as citizens, administrators, and politicians. The conclusions that can be reached are necessarily interim and tentative. These can refer to findings from diffusion and transition research, with reference to diffusion research, which has defined cycles of innovation and cycles of production. Various functions can be differentiated here, and an analytical distinction can be made between types of change agents, as you can see on the slide. In a cycle of innovation, change agents act by defining open questions and challenges and putting them on the agenda, by facilitating problem solutions as catalysts, by mediating between conflicting groups, or by freeing blocked decision-making processes within groups, by integrating disparate innovation requirements, or by nudging the institutional innovations which are required to solve a problem from below, or in the role of decision-making elite from above. In the production cycle, change agents are active as the inventors, as the entrepreneurs, as developers or distributors of new concepts, products and services, but also, as we have already learned, as enlightened consumers through demanding new products and letting them circulate. Initially, this is an analytical distinction. Naturally, change agents can also fulfill several of these functions simultaneously. Social science research suggests that profound social and cultural changes often go hand in hand with generational changes. Effectively, when major changes such as these such as these occur, something happens at the social macro level. Younger groups show more openness towards innovations in general and are in many cases early adopters of new technologies. This has been extensively documented in market and diffusion research. At the same time, historical research shows that cognitive and emotional discrepancies between peer groups, in part expressed as generational conflict, can mobilize social movements. One important question is whether actors have sufficient strategic competence, or whether they can join forces with other change agents in order to initiate or accelerate transformation processes. This means that not only the roles of technical experts, political administrative decision-making elites, managers, entrepreneurs, and so on must be examined, but also the role of other key groups such as consumers, smaller communal initiatives, and informal networks. Change agents can therefore be individuals who gain trust and repute at micro level as leaders and role models, and who then work together at the meso level in manageable groups, for example in study and working groups, as members of a society, an association, an interest group, in professional associations, in voluntary teams. And finally, they can also be major organizations like corporations, political administrative units from local to supra and transnational level, and other cooperatives, including certain professional groups or patrons. Besides the capacity for innovation and public spiritedness, the decisive criterion is the ability to communicate newness and to engender feelings of identity and power awareness in their respective spheres of communication. These spheres of communication stretch from direct interpersonal communication to the cross-border virtual communication platforms of social and scientific networks. Change management and organization development teach us that so-called soft factors like social behavior and the qualification to manage processes are key to the success of change processes. The significance of niche markets for economic development has already been noted in evolutionary economics. Transition research also assumes that, for the most part, transformation processes begin in niches, where they are initially confined and almost invisible. This marginality may have led to a significant underestimation or self-underestimation of their impact. However, the decisive question is how isolated, innovative impulses, often initiated by minorities and alleged outsiders viewed as mad by the majority, manage to be accorded cultural hegemony and succeed. One aspect is that contemporary change agents in local and supra-regional initiatives, non-governmental organizations, and so on, typically create role models, turn attitude and behavior patterns into action patterns, and are capable of motivating others. That's what we meant when we are saying we also come from action to awareness. Considering the growing significance of strategic and/or sustainable consumerism, the influence of smaller communal movements, so-called grassroots initiatives, is also under discussion. Initiatives such as these exist in various forms of loose associations, from charitable associations to social enterprises. Local actors have the advantage of being able to refer to context-bound knowledge and can appreciate what will work under specific local conditions and what will not. This corresponds with the often documented connaissance that change processes initiated top-down frequently fail precisely because they do not take local knowledge into account. However, taking local knowledge on board is a precondition for success in a specific cultural and social environment. Let's come to the question where and how change agents are already shaping the transformation today. Transformation is nothing that we plan for tomorrow. Transformation is something that is already taking place and has already started a long time ago. So we have to look at change agents at different levels and in various fields. They can be found at all social levels and in various fields of activity. For example, in thematically focused environmental and citizens initiatives and social protest movements, in governmental and non-governmental organizations, including churches and foundations, or they can be scientists, engineers, town planners, architects. Change agents can also be found in professional associations who make their members swear a kind of Hippocratic oath, metaphorically speaking, from development cooperation into care for the elderly and other aspects of voluntary and private sector entrepreneurial activities. We would like to give you some examples, but these examples are monothematic, channeled by us, restricted to initiatives which are active in the areas of energy supply, mobility, urban development and land use, for example, food production and forest protection in our report. These are just some national and international sample initiatives. Their inclusion neither signifies any special kind of seal of approval, nor particularly in the case of private sector enterprises, it is intended as an express recommendation, to make that clear. First, ideas can be given from the sector of energy supply, which is a very important transformation area, as you all know. And here I will tell you about one example, the Black Forest electricity rebels from Schönau. It's a village in Germany. And they represent in our mind at first glance unlikely seeming a case of an originally private sector local initiative of electric power producers starting to produce energy themselves using wind and solar energy and later cogeneration and biomass before the liberalization of the German energy market in 1998. Over the past few years, the number of customers has multiplied, and by now the Elektrizitätswerke Schönau, EWS, supply electric power to more than 100,000 private households, companies and industrial enterprises all over Germany, making them one of Germany's leading green energy suppliers. The EWS invests their profits into the development of a sustainable energy supply. They also subsidize small-scale electric power generating plants, combined heat and power heating systems or biogas plants on application. The required funds are raised by being included in the price they charge for their electricity as an extra, the so-called sun cent. This has made it possible to install more than 3,000 small-scale eco-power stations to date. Through these directly subsidized power stations alone, more than 10,000 tons of CO2 are saved annually, which makes a difference. Within a short period of time, a small local initiative numbering just a few people grew into a successful business with impressive social and energy political dynamics. Joined by a growing number of actors, it provided an incentive to change and soon grew in scope in terms of effect. Such initiatives like EWS for Change have the effect that A, the actors following the success in their measures do not stay at entry level, but that they immediately start to look for further fields to which they can apply the experiences which they have gathered. The tangible experience that the immediate life world is changeable provides a motive or reinforces a motivation to continue to change this life world. Simultaneously, B, the experience of self-efficacy, as a concept by Bandura from 1977, has a paradigm-forming effect and provides examples to be followed, therefore serving the diffusion of transformation impulses. This is achieved through C, utilization of the communication density of existing work, learning and leisure time communities. Ordinary communication about work, learning or leisure activities is episodically charged for the common good. This leads to D, a development of loose networks with a collective identity, with the establishment of internal shared habits. This is the way we do it. And creates additional extrovert distinctions. We don't do things like that anymore. The initiatives by change agents for the establishment and the development of a low-carbon energy supply described here were usually only made possible or only gained pace through changes in the regulatory framework of a nation. This exemplifies the role of a proactive state in the transformation process. The German Feed-in Law, or Stromeinspeisegesetz, came into force in 1991, opening the electric power market for private generators of renewable power. Under this law, the feed-in tariff, the energy suppliers are legally obliged to buy the power generated from renewable energy sources in their supply region and to pay at least 90% of the average profits from the sale of this electricity for it. Power from renewable energy sources, previously viewed as not financially viable, was thereby made profitable. The monetary effects of this law were not financed by the public purse, but were met by the electricity suppliers and their customers. One peculiarity in this law is that it had been initiated by a coalition consisting of members of all parliamentary parties. That is, it was initiated directly by the parliament. A small group of Bundestag members, many of whom belonged to the Committee of Research and Technology, succeeded in putting the advantages of renewable energies on the political agenda, actively supported by the recently established German Renewable Energy Federation. In 2000 then, the law on renewable energies, the so-called Erneuerbare Energiengesetz, developed further. Instead of being linked to the average electricity price, long-term fixed prices for feed-in electricity from renewable energies were set, and remuneration was differentiated according to the sector. Now, the fixed remuneration amount not only applies for as long as the law is valid, but is guaranteed for 20 years. The law has thus introduced strong incentives to invest in renewable energies. The energy supply companies had to commit themselves to buying the regeneratively generated power. For wind and photovoltaic energy plant operators, this means a high level of investment and planning security. Examples of a locally initiated energy turnaround can also be found outside of Germany, of course. In 1997, the Danish Ministry of Climate and Energy ran a competition for choosing a test region to assess the potential of renewable energies. And even on a broader level, the project Desertec, solar energy from the Sahara, is an international project which could become a central element in converting Europe's energy supply to renewable energy carriers. Desertec intends to build solar thermal power plants with minimal resource consumption and a high efficiency factor in sparsely inhabited desert regions with particularly high insolation. The electricity thus generated is to be used locally for development and modernization, and the surplus is to be exported, for example, to Europe. High voltage direct current transmission is to ensure minimal transmission losses. The concept will be developed further by a cooperative of countries bordering the Mediterranean, both north and south. The solar power will be fed into the European super-smart grid and combined with electricity from other renewable energy sources. This project could create employment opportunities and generate income, and in the long term allow zero carbon seawater desalination and improve industrial, traffic and transport infrastructures in the mostly little developed North African producer countries, but also in countries south of the Sahara. This was an example for not just a single change agent combination, but even on the global level, the emergence of a network that brings together pioneers of change on the individual and institutional level with a proactive state and a global network of cooperation. And we could find other examples in the realms of mobility, land use, and so on. So let us come to a conclusion here. We have shown different change agents from selective fields of sustainability politics who voice their doubts regarding the status quo of the high carbon regime in practical terms in important positions, thereby nudging considerable sectoral and cross-sectoral changes. How can these insular individual actors become the critical mass required, pushing important levers for the transformation with the emphasis required to set the course? And how can individual actors achieve a shared feeling of collective self-efficacy and come together in a widespread social movement? Or, to put it in another way, how can the self-powering co-evolution in various social subsystems, or the important concurrences of multiple change which are required to cause the imminent and already occurring change processes to densify into a great transformation that is needed to stabilize the Earth system, and in particular the climate system we brought about? The figure shows you, the slide illustrates a path change agents tend to follow, frequently from the margins of society, where unorthodox thinkers and outsiders are at home, out of the so-called niches, the birthplace of visions of alternative development, through the stages of social communication, agenda setting, objection, opinion leader echo, mass medialization, into a wider innovation network, then into the social and political mainstream, up to and including the habitualization of initially marginal attitude patterns and behaviors. A bottom-up transformation has far more chance of succeeding if change agents in their respective promoter roles manage to convince the broad majority of the plausibility of low-carbon life practices in everyday life, of their self-evidence in fact, and to anchor them as the standard option. The synopsis of surveys and studies on changing values that was described in episode 1 on the level of political awareness, on participative citizenship, and on the appeal of non-profit intermediary organizations, associations or even parties, revealed roughly 3 differently sized segments of the population in wealthy industrial countries, such as Germany, who might be appropriate for an inclusive transformation strategy as pioneers, advocates, and partners. There is first a broad potential of people who, according to representative surveys, would in principle be willing to embrace low-carbon changes with regard to their own lifestyles, but who have not or not as yet taken any or few practical steps to do so. This is what we call a latency of change agency. A narrow band then of the dedicated and active citizens who more or less consistently follow this aim systematically in their daily practices. Let's call this branch activism. And then a medium segment of people who are more or less actively involved at a civil and voluntary level in other areas of life, like, for example, sports and leisure activities, humanitarian and technical aid organizations, culture and art, education and care of the elderly, corporate activities, voluntary services, etc., as well as more informally by way of self-help groups or local neighborhood schemes in this way, mostly during critical biographical passages, like, for example, starting a family, school enrollment and self-reliance of children, parents going into retirement care, etc., and addressing the aim of a good life in taking on responsibility for others, or feel the lack of this aim. This hypothetical path, and if necessary, the concrete task at hand for achieving a broad civil commitment to climate protection and sustainability is therefore A, to stimulate the latent willingness to act through pragmatic, if at all possible, not moralizing input. B, to communicate the actions of activists in the form of action patterns and standard options on a wider basis. And in doing so, C, to make sustainability aims plausible to a larger part of the citizenship. This can succeed even better in the familiar core arenas of civil commitment, such as social security, education, nature conservation and consumer protection, etc., and absorb aspects of sustainability so that no additional time-consuming aims, apart from the respectively preferred activities, are introduced, touching instead on central issues relating to services of general interest and subjective life satisfaction, to enable the various levels of civil commitment to meet synergistically to create a collective identity, what is called community building. This is vital to broaden the transformation agenda and for the actor's self-efficacy. Dear students, thank you very much for listening to Lecture 8 on Agents of Transformation. This episode about change agents reflects Chapter 6 in our WBGU report on a social contract for sustainability. You will find some questions for self-study and some literature here. Thank you. And I hope to see you again in the interview.